Hi, everybody. My name is Kealy Spring. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. And today I have a very special guest with me, Natalie, who I've known for a little bit. We actually met in, I think, 2017 when I moved into an office that was right next to Natalie. We had our own little corner and it was great. And we did networking events and we were able to consult with each other. And then the building got bought out by somebody. This was just before the pandemic. And they just decided not to renew any of our leases. So we all had to go other places. And then, yeah, it was a little bit of karma because then pandemic hit and nobody was in that building.
Mhm.
But that was kind of how Natalie and I became very connected in terms of clinical and getting to know each other on a personal level. And I appreciate, I think will come up probably in this interview is we always kind of connected on that, these are small businesses that we own
Mhm.
and being a small business owner and what that means and the challenges for that. And it's nice to have other people that kind of, you know, find ways to kind of navigate that space in kind of unique and different ways
Mhm.
like these videos. So with that said, Natalie, I'll turn it over to you to kind of introduce yourself and, what niches and populations you work with.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Natalie Spautz. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in both Hawaii and California. And I have two businesses, actually. I have a money coach business, and this is actually for small businesses, for private practice owners. And I really do open the door not just to therapists, like fellow colleagues, but also any holistic healer, acupuncture, physical therapist, coach, folks who call themselves private practice. I actually just recently met a private practice teacher, and we may do some collaboration, but she's incredible. So there are teachers in private practice. There's a lot of different professions in that small business space that are more service-based businesses. And I'm very passionate about that work. I do free workshops. I try to give back to the community in this way because I see the struggle is real, right? And working hard to stay afloat, especially as, if you're solo or you have a small group practice, it does take a lot of lead work behind the scenes. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't always, number one, going into it realize, or number two, realize when they're going to see somebody who has a small business, that there are a lot of things that go into that fee. There are a lot of things that you don't see, that this person is doing to make sure that, they're able to still offer you those services. So I'm very passionate about that. And I have an anti-oppressive lens when it comes to this. So, you might ask, how do you run a small business and be anti-capitalist? It's a
Question.
conundrum. It's a paradox for sure. It's like, how do I stay alive and then disagree with, or just notice how these systems are causing harm to people, right? So yeah, that one's an interesting one. It's always a learning journey, for me in that coaching world, and sort of separating the money stuff out that way. I'm also a financial therapist, a couples therapist. I work with a lot of individual folks, namely ADHDers, neurodivergent people, gifted people, in my private practice. And I do see a pretty good range. My private practice is called the Conscious Partnership. So I really do have that couples focus. I really love actually working one-on-one with people who are working on their romantic relationship or their relationships in general. And I really do believe that you can work on your partnership even solo. And I'm very passionate about that work. And very excited when people are coming in motivated, saying, I want to be a better partner. I want to figure this out. Or my partner is driving me up the wall. How do I understand why this is happening, and going deeper beyond that? So that's becoming more and more of a niche for me too. But I love the couples work. I'm starting to offer intensives, which is really, really cool. Especially for couples who are ready and willing to invest not just the money, but the energy and the time that it takes to kind of go deep more quickly. Because otherwise, sometimes I see couples upwards of like a year, sometimes even longer than that, depending on how complex their dynamics are. My goal is to see couples and then, like, you know, have them leave, right? They don't need me anymore. And that really is exciting to see couples graduate. It's one of my favorite things about the job. But I really do notice that couples who are super motivated when they come in and they're ready to do something like 2.5 hour session. Like that's no joke, right?
Two
We're
and
gonna
a
we're
half
gonna
hours.
get in there, we're gonna figure this out together, and then we're gonna come out of that experience and then you're gonna apply it. So that work is also just really inspiring. And I love just the idea of doing more concentrated work up front and then kind of checking in once a month, um, so that they're, just making sure they're still keeping their momentum going. And that's essentially me for now. I have a lot to do here. I'm managing two different businesses, but they're very different, right? I run a lot of workshops in my coaching business. I'm really excited about groups and things like that. And then a bit more of the couple one-on-one in my therapy. So it just keeps me balanced, right? It just keeps me feeling like, yeah, I have a lot of different types of work that I get to do, which is really exciting. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. This is this kind of business piece. One of the things I love about kind of being able to connect with you, because I also have the two businesses. We've talked about this, the coaching business.
You've been coaching for a while.
I've been doing it for a
Yeah.
minute here.
Before it was like popular.
I know,
For sure.
for sure. Okay, well, so Natalie, let's dive into some questions here a little bit about starting with, how did you decide to become a therapist? What was your journey to getting here, and
Mhm.
what
Yeah.
that look like?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with a story about my very first therapist. So my parents were divorced when I was young, and they, I think, had the wisdom at the time to say, hey, let's just make sure our kids are okay with this transition. So they brought us to play therapy. And I remember I was 4.5 playing with Shira with my play therapist, Melody, and I remember her name. I
Yeah.
was so young, but I loved it. It was a little weird because they had a two-way mirror. And so
Oh,
I knew my parents were on the other side talking to somebody else, like I knew they were there. Or maybe it was just one of my parents at a time because they were not doing so well in their relationship. But I just remember seeing like this mirror and being like, okay, whatever, I'm just going to go play, and having such a blast with my play therapist. And Shira was she was like my favorite. I think I remember some My Little Pony, some of the classics back in the 80s.
yeah.
I'm dating myself
Well,
right now.
I'm with you.
Um, yes. But I just recall feeling so attached to her, feeling so warm and very cared for by my play therapist. I mean, I don't remember a lot of specifics, but I remember the feelings. And I remember feeling so much better, like happier after I left. And that was my very first experience of therapy. So can't help but look back and be like, oh, yeah, I think that planted a seed for me because in my intern years, I actually started to do that work with that age range myself. And I loved it. I thought that's what I wanted to do. But I ended up going more of the couples route. I don't see little ones anymore, although I have a lot of that insight, a lot of specialized training with the 0 to 5 age range for little ones. But yeah, that was probably, I mean, such a formative experience, right? That period before age 5 is just such a critical period for development. And so I just think that, yeah, that was pretty cool of my parents. I think it helped instill some resilience and just some awareness of like how I could use play to heal in my life even just as a child and that core memory, right? And then as I grew up, I mean, it was definitely, I went through a lot as a kid. I feel like looking back, there were a lot of different things that happened that were super stressful. And my parents were never really, maybe once they got older, they got a little more chilled out, but they did not get along. And that was really stressful on me as a child. And so, as a teen, I started doing poetry. I started chatting with my girlfriends late at night, drinking coffee and, having, 3, 4 hour long conversations. I developed deep friendships, deep relationships. I feel like I learned how to process my emotions that way through my friendships. And then when I got into college, I started going to therapy again. And I have been in therapy probably on and off since um, since I was 18. So I've seen a few therapists throughout the years. I feel like, every single one of those therapists I saw, they offered something new, something different. And I learned about therapy that way. Even before I became a therapist, I had maybe two or three different therapists by the time I went to my grad program. I also actually minored in clinical psychology in my bachelor's. And so that's more of a rare thing. I went to UC Santa Barbara, and they have an incredible kind of hybrid. They bring in some grad students into the undergrad, and they have a lot of different options, a lot of different as a psych major, at least back then. This was back in early 2000s, also dating myself. So a couple decades ago now, but yeah, they introduce you to clinical psychology in their psychology program. And I knew probably from age 18 that I wanted to be a therapist. It was really clear to me. I was taking a couple of psych classes, and I just felt it. It was just like a boom, there's the path, right? And took a few years off of school in between my programs, my bachelor's and my master's. But in that time, what I really discovered is I did some more inner work, and I was like, I need to do some work before I really start on this next leg of the journey and go toward licensure. And I really confronted just some unhealthy patterns that I had in my life when I was about, gosh, when was it? 23, 24. Um, yeah, I was struggling with some alcohol misuse, and I was seeing a therapist at the time, and um, I quit drinking. And it was through a lot of mindfulness meditation. I didn't do like the classic 12 step. I don't know, looking back, how far I was on the spectrum. I see addiction and misuse on a spectrum. I'm not even sure that I fit the criteria for alcohol use disorder. It used to be called dependency disorder, I think, alcohol dependency disorder back in the day. But I decided that alcohol was not helping me, and it actually became a really big motivator for me in wanting to become a healer. Like, recovery has been a big integrated part of being, a therapist, and being somebody who others count on, and being that steady person that can really help people also go through the recovery. So it is one of the things that I don't always advertise it, but I do specialize in that as well. And I just feel like that healing journey for me has just been so meaningful, right? The healing from the mentors and the therapists and just the people in my life, and the education itself as well has just been really incredible. I mean, it's been life changing, right? And so I felt moved to do that, right? Offer that. And you probably hear this almost from every therapist. It's like, I saw a therapist, or I went through something myself. And there is nothing like that lived experience, right? To be such a deep motivator for change. And then so cool to be able to walk next to somebody and say, I see you changing, and I'm like here to help you do that too. Yeah.
Really powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that piece, Natalie. I think, the journey is real. And I think the point of these, interviews is partly to humanize. And I think that that's a
Mm-hmm.
real lived experience by a lot of
Yeah.
people. And, there's a lot of shame and judgment and things that can come
Mm-hmm.
about with it. And I think, it doesn't always get the surface to the surface
Mm-hmm.
that it, as showing up a little bit more humanly about things
Yeah,
that we've struggled with, I think can help people.
absolutely. Yeah. And I hope it helps someone, right? Just hearing my story that, it is possible. I have 17 years now of,
For you.
yeah, no substances, and it's been a game changer for me. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So let me pivot a little bit to you
Mhm.
mentioned briefly tiny bit about what you like about therapy when we first,
Yes.
but what do you like or love about kind of being a therapist and in this role?
hmm it's interesting. I'm noticing wanting to talk about what I also don't like about being a therapist because I think
That's
there are
fine.
some
Yeah.
unreasonable expectations people put on us
Yeah.
because of our background, and I don't like that.
Uh,
But I do love, when you were reflecting back to me your impression of some of our consultation together. Um, I love that. I love thinking deeply about things because it helps me feel connected to myself and to other people. And I love the just the framework of working on the way that I see it, like my job as being a therapist is working to be very present with people and to be as compassionate a human as I can be. And both of those practices are core to who I am. And so I'm really grateful to be able to practice that as a form of work because I just feel like I'm a better human for it.
mhm.
So that's one of my favorite parts is just like the healing or the practice or just even the focal energy on that way of being in the world, right? I don't think we have enough of that. I don't think we have enough empathy. I don't think we learn about this enough or teach it enough. And so, sometimes I think about I'm putting energy out into the world, right? I am being a healing presence, right? That's who I am, and that's what I do, and that's why people pay me in a way is to bring those qualities to them so that they can also bring that to themselves and then to others in their lives, right? Because I love to see it. I don't know about you, but I love to see the ripple effect.
Love it. Yeah.
When people come in and they're like, you know what, my this and such was struggling, and then I just listened to them, and then they like seemed like that really helped them, and they're like, that's what you do with me, and I'm learning how to do that with other people, and I was like, oh yes, like we can just like be humans together, right? We can just listen to one another, and that is so powerful. Um,
Yeah.
so there's a lot more I love about it, and specifically being in private practice because I've worked for agencies before. I've been employed in the past, and mainly when I was a trainee and an intern. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things, and being in private practice just gives me a lot of just the freedom, the ability to decide what my life looks like to a point. I mean, having to work to live, I think if anyone is in the position of having to work to live, there's a certain amount of deciding for you, right? How your labor is used, how your time is used, because if you have to work in order to pay your bills, in order to like have basic needs met, um, there's a certain amount of, I think we can all feel it, right? Restriction. And
Sure.
that's not that's not my faith. I wish everyone could just have freedom and not feel like they have to choose between what they love and then money, right? Making money and surviving. So I don't like that part, but I do like at least of the options that are available right now with the systems we have, I do like the private and the solo, choosing my own way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Kind of navigating it for what feels right and appropriate for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can
Yeah.
resonate with that. Since you brought up the expectations people put on us, because this is definitely
Mm.
something that
Yes, this is juicy, right?
it is something that, just to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit, it is
Yeah,
something that clinicians we talk about amongst one another, because I think
yeah.
sometimes to even check, sometimes somebody will come at an expectation that I'm like either explicitly or implicitly, and sometimes I have to like sit with it and
Mhm.
process, wait, what is that actually something that you know, is reasonable to expect
Right.
to bring, or, so this comes up a lot. So just since you
hmm
brought it up, could you give me a little flavor of what you're kind of, you know, meaning there? Is it
Yeah,
what I'm saying or
sure. Yeah, well, I think all of us can relate to just the experience of not knowing someone and then sharing what you do, and there being some just either surprising response or fearful response, or it just is very revealing, right? When somebody reacts to just you saying what you do for a living, right? There's either, people start telling you their life story or they share something like that's misinformation about what we do, or um, there's just like a lot of ways that people, you don't even know me and you think this particular thing about me. So that, or just, even like acquaintances might say something, or even like family or friends might say something like, you're a therapist, you should know better,
Mm.
when I make a mistake, right? Or when I'm struggling with something, or right, like something that is genuinely, I'm a human being first,
Yeah.
right? And therapist is what I do for money. And it's a part of me, right? Because I resonate with like that healer archetype. But
Mm.
um yeah, it varies from, something that is just surprising and like, I'm not sure where you got that from, to again, like, you should know better. You shouldn't be, you know, you should be perfect, I guess, is the message I get sometimes from some folks close, but also mostly distant. Most of my close folks like actually really get what I do and that I'm a human being. But, once in a while you'll get a comment like that just really throws you off. And yeah, I was resonating too when you were sharing. I was like, yeah, I feel that way too. And um, just sort of sitting with like, is this reasonable? Like, should I be a perfect human being? Like, no,
There's
that's just not real.
not attainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's funny you bring up the reactions. I'll tell a quick story. We were at my,
Yeah.
not date me, but I was at my 20-year high school reunion and
Uh-huh.
talking to a bunch of people. And I was talking to an old friend's partner, and it was me and my husband and this gentleman, and we're chatting. He's talking, mile a minute, this guy, about everything. And then
Uh-huh.
he says, "What do you do?" to me, and I told him, and he literally, his face just went blank, and he turned and he walked away. And my husband started cracking up. He's like, "You just shut that guy down. You didn't even, all you told him was your what you do." And I was like, "Yeah, that happens more."
Yes. Right.
Right. But I had like this witness of my husband being like, "That's, oh my gosh." It was like
Uh-huh.
this shutdown of like,
Right.
so I
Yeah.
had that experience
Mm.
multiple times where
And
it's,
who knows what came up for him,
who
right?
knows?
But maybe he had a bad experience in therapy, or
And
he was afraid, like
sure,
something.
all the things could be anything,
Who knows? But
you
that,
know,
yeah, that's really, really surprising.
right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh,
Well,
okay.
that's definitely not the first time I've heard something like that
For
happen.
sure, for sure.
And yeah, very interesting to see that. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Mm.
maybe it was like so telling because I've experienced it, but then having,
Right.
somebody witness it and be like, whoa, that was
That was
abrupt.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
shut down the conversation. Just
Right. Just crickets.
right.
And we're done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Okay, so pivoting a little bit back to more some of those
Mhm.
clinical pieces, you mentioned, working with couples and individuals and the financial work. Um,
Yeah.
are there certain modalities or, techniques that
Mhm.
favor over others?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think my whole style and my just approach and how I've been trained, I think like many therapists, it changes over time because of my clinical experience, my lived experience, what I'm being trained in, my education, what I'm reading, what I'm taking in from the world around me, and kind of becoming more myself, if that makes sense. So these days, my favorite modalities are, feminist theory and anti-oppressive, anti-racist. I'm really digging racial identity development work, because I see a lot of interracial or intercultural couples. Most of them, actually, I was just reflecting on them, all of them are actually interracial in my practice right now. One partner is white and one partner is a brown or black person from various, you know, racial backgrounds. And Yeah, I'm really digging that. Culturally responsive, and just bringing in more systemic theory. I had a mentor share with recently with me that she thinks I should have become a social worker. LCSWs do also offer psychotherapy, by the way, for those who don't know. MFT is another type of license that has typically they have a little less of the social and contextual focus. There's a little bit more focus on the family of origin, right? Marriage and family. It's all in the title, but more of like an individualist kind of way of looking at people. And what I discovered is that bridging these two ways of thinking is actually really, really useful, especially for the folks that tend to come to see me, right? Because we need to create room for our not just our individual identity or universal identity, but also our social or cultural identity. And that's a different aspect of ourselves that for many people is a strong and an important aspect of ourselves and how we relate to others. So I'm digging that more and more. My background, like my deeper background, is a bit more mindfulness. I went to CIIS, which is a sort of East-West psychology, a lot of Buddhist psychology in that, but also some more Western psychodynamic. I'm interested in more contemporary psychodynamic work, which is looking at integrating identity, integrating more social identity and things like that, not just sort of Freudian theory, right? That's pretty far back and pretty antiquated, and being more of a feminist, being more of, socially aware, racism is real, all this stuff, right? Patriarchy is real kind of therapist. Um, some of that stuff just doesn't even fly for me anymore. And some of it is a bit sexist in nature, right? And biased. So I'm moving much farther away from that and much more into more of the social justice realm. And within that, it's really interesting. I recently, in the last 4 or 5 years or so, have been bringing polyvagal work, which is it's a little controversial in terms of the theory, but the practice of it, I really appreciate, right? Because there's a lot of academia behind some of the theory, and you'll see some, this has been debunked, or which it hasn't entirely. There's just certain parts of the theory around what is the vagus nerve control in the body that's not entirely clear or proven yet. But I love the concept behind it, which is connected to a lot of neuroscience and psychobiology and just understanding our bodies and our nervous system. And so I use this particular tool. I think it's still applicable, even with some of the sort of debunked pieces. I think there are ways to kind of listen to your body, right? Like, am I in a survival state, or am I in a state where my body is open to connection and safety? And those two main distinctions, and kind of looking at some subtle differences and where you tend to go, and just understanding yourself more deeply with that brain body mind body connection. So bringing that in and weaving that in with some attachment work, with some social justice work, and with some depth work. This is really where I am right now, and I really integrate all of them. I'm also really interested in collaborating with people I work with, because I just think it's so easy to be like, here's how I work and let's do this. Right. And when I have multiple tools, I'm like, well, we could approach it this way, this way, or this way. And I'm starting to really bring that in to sessions, especially with couples. And I'm like, well, I can think of multiple ways to help you with this issue. Which one? Like, pick. And people will be like, I like that one. I'm like, cool, let's try that. And it's less like I'm the expert and here, let me tell you how to fix your problems, and more like, well, here's some stuff we can do together. And now let's choose collaboratively. And so people feel, I think, more empowered. That's really what I'm about. I'm just here next to you figuring this out together. Instead of, I have all the answers and let me help you, because you can't help yourself kind of feeling, which doesn't, that's, the more um, experience with a couple decades now of studying this stuff and experience in some form of counseling, it's like I have less interest in being, the savior, the the rescuer, and I have way more interest in just being here with you as another person, and supporting you for sure and doing some guidance as necessary. But for the most part, like helping you tap into what you know you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, two things. First, let's start with, could you explain the vagus nerve for people that don't know it, of what
Sure.
that concept? I think you did a good job of kind of explaining the mind-body connection and all that, but
Mhm.
I think that nerve is, there is a lot of research that's being done, but there's obviously
Yes.
unknowns. Could you just share a
Oh,
little?
yeah. There's a lot we don't know about the human brain and that we don't know specifically about the vagus nerve. But what we do know is that it's part of our nervous system and a powerful part of our nervous system that helps us regulate our emotions and also what's called a survival response. So when you hear the term fight or flight, or you hear the term, we were talking about that shutdown, right? That guy was probably in, from polyvagal theory terms, was in his dorsal vagal or his there's sort of another way to describe it, which is that the parasympathetic overcompensates, right? So it's sort of shutting the nervous system down. And the nervous system is responsible for communicating with your body, like what all these different systems in your body do, right? How do they function? So the brain communicates danger, danger through the vagus nerve to your body, and then your body responds to that, right? And this is all outside of awareness, right? We're not even realizing that our brain is like, watch out, right? You might feel it in your body, but it happens so fast, right? And outside of our conscious awareness. So we just find ourselves sometimes we don't even know what triggered that, right? You heard the term trigger. That's also a pop psychology term, right? So what activated that physiological response. And it was your brain. Your brain is always taking in information. So, vagus nerve, again, we're figuring it out. We don't know everything. I don't pretend to know everything. I think that's just not really helpful. But what we do know is that we can activate it in order to regulate it, right? So, we regulate our body through activating the vagus nerve. And we also help our brain realize, right? Because sometimes it's wrong, sometimes it's on point, by the way. Sometimes our brain knows this situation is unsafe, right? And either let me get out of here, let me fight back, let me shut down, right? And your brain kind of sends you to the state that it determines is going to like help you survive the situation. Sometimes it's 100% on point. It's helping you out. It's helping you survive. I always say thank you to my ancestors, right, for
Yeah.
figuring this out for us because it does keep us alive, but it also can interrupt things that are really important, right? Like that we get activated when we don't need to be. And then that gets in the way of what we're trying to accomplish or what we need, or, affects our relationships and just our quality of life because it's hard. It's hard to be in fight or flight, right? And that's a really stressful experience. So I hope that was clear. Do you have any more
No,
questions for me?
no. I appreciate it. I think
Great.
that's something that I love reading about that research and stuff just because regulating
Hmm.
the nervous system is such a key component of the work I think
Hmm.
most clinicians need to
Yeah.
do patients. Um, and then the second part that kind of stood out for me about what you
Mm.
were saying before is it's this idea that the patient or the client is the expert on them.
Yeah.
We may have the skill set and the expertise and the tools to offer that menu of options, but
Hmm.
we're trying to get people to tap into their own expertise of what works for them
Right.
in their situation, given
Hmm.
given their context or where they find themselves.
Yes. Yeah. And I think for me, that's a big deviation. It's not that I wasn't taught that early on, but I think that there can be even subtle ways or um, sort of ways that, when you're trying to make sense of someone in your own mind, there's only so much information we have about that person, right? And while I think it's possible to, especially because sometimes I do longer term depth work with one-on-one folks, they tend to stay for a while because we go deeper and session over session, you really get to know yourself, right? You really get to know yourself and those kinds of, and that kind of process. So yeah, I just think that, it's just really important from a standpoint of respect. Um, and, you know, assuming that someone is dependent or needs me is just also not very helpful. It's not that I don't think I'm needed. I think therapists are very much needed because there's so many social issues that are causing a lot of mental health issues, right? So many systemic imbalances that deeply impact us. And then, of course, some of the more personal experiences too. Um, and at the same time, I think, yeah, there's something to be said for just even bringing that energy of respect, like for the person who's sitting in front of me is really important. Yeah.
So to that end, what does a session look like? I mean, obviously it'll change depending on,
Mhm.
kind of what unit of treatment, if it's a couple or individual,
Yeah.
but do you tend to be a little bit more organic in nature,
Mhm.
or a little bit more kind of, you know, could
Yeah.
step by step kind of thing?
Step by step. Well, it really depends on the person. Most people, I let them lead, or I, ask them what's up, what's coming up for you this week. Um, Many people bring in, oh, I want to talk about this, this, and this. Some people don't know, and that's also okay. So I tend to ask, do you need help thinking about what to talk about today, or shall we just, do a little meditation or just sort of sit with until something comes up? I have yet to experience someone not coming up with something because there's always plenty to work on, right? But usually a typical session looks like we kind of cover more immediate things. If there's anything that was, really pressing or recent that needs processing, we will explore that. And that happens with couples and individuals. Um, More so with so say we're doing some polyvagal work, sometimes there is sort of we're agreeing on, okay, there's going to be a few sessions where we'll do a full profile one session, and then we'll kind of develop more tools to kind of, you sort of build on it. But every session I always check in and say, hey, we talked about doing this session. Is that still important for you, or is there something else you need? And so oftentimes we'll set an agenda for the session. And I think a lot of people feel, I know for me, I would appreciate a therapist leading like that because I don't want to be boxed in. And at the same time, like, let's keep this thing going that's actually really helping me and that, we've collaborated on choosing together. So, I do my best not to just sort of leave off on that and bring it back in. And at the same time, many people have a lot that happens week to week. And what's also really cool is, we start to identify patterns together, right? So if you're able to come in each session and say, this happened for me this week, or this happened again, or, this is changing, then we start to make sense of, oh, wow, like that seems to be happening every week. Oh, wow, that's changing now. What do you think is happening there? So we can actually start to notice, you know, patterns and energy and, just the dynamics of life or certain relationships, for example. And so, yeah, that's what it typically looks like. Once in a while, someone will bring up something they have never brought up before. They're like, hey, I don't think I've ever shared this with you, but, is this something you help with? And sometimes it's a specialty of mine. And I'm like, oh, you're ADHD. Well, that's actually something I specialize in. I didn't know that, right? They hadn't shared that about themselves, or they think they're autistic or ADHD or some form of neurodivergent. And then so we can explore that. So yeah, I really love those sessions too, because it's sort of like, oh wow, like another layer that we can get to, and then maybe we can weave that into and just understanding yourself and what you need and what's sort of getting in the way of what you want in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a perfect segue to you mentioned a little bit about what surprises you, but like
Yes.
other things that surprise you about therapy or that kind of come up that you're like,
Yeah. Well, I think it's really, one thing that surprises me sometimes is how the process of change for different people is vastly different. And I even see this with my partner and myself. Like we have a different process of change. And sometimes when we get stuck, it's because we're negotiating through like what we're comfortable with in terms of change. Like I know for me, I'm like, this needs to change. I'm doing it right now. My partner is like, I need
get
to
off.
think about it for a minute, which is fair. That's so fair. I'm like, okay, I need to slow my roll then, right? Like, if we're going to do this together, then I need to like hang out for a minute. Um, but that's cool to see that and be able to help couples identify that if there's any neurodivergence or different ways of processing. But yeah, sometimes it just people surprise me because I'm getting to know them and their process of change is either, not what maybe their process of change also changes, right, with practice as they're, working on changing things in their lives. But some couples, they'll come for a few sessions and then they're like, we're doing so great. And like, what? Like, that's amazing to see change happen that fast within just like 3 or 4 sessions. Sometimes couples really struggle, or even individuals are struggling for a while, and then they just make this incredible leap. Um, and sometimes it's just like, well, maybe that was happening all along. Like you gotta kind of trust the process, right? But I think that surprises me. I think what surprises me the most is how over time I just care deeply about everyone I see. Um, and I get a little emotional about it, right? Because I don't always share this so openly, right? Because it can feel a little overwhelming to know that your therapist cares about you so much. But I'm surprised at how uh, just open-hearted I feel and how people just inspire me all the time. And it's so lovely to have that deep connection with people. And then in turn, how much that helps me feel like myself. And I don't know how else to describe this because I think a lot of people, depending on your training, like every therapist goes through developmental phases where it's like, I don't know how to do this. And then I kind of know how to do this. And then it's like, well, I really know how to do this. And then meanwhile, like I still don't know what I'm doing as like a through line. I think that's kind of sums up the process of becoming a therapist and even like a more advanced therapist. But I think, what surprises me about being this practitioner of this art and science, if you will, is just how much it helps me uh, feel connected to myself. And that might sound like weird to some folks. It's almost like a paradox because how can you feel more connected to yourself if you're so focused on other people? Well, for me, I see my job is actually it's more of like a mindfulness meditation. When I'm sitting with someone, I'm not just focusing on them, I'm also very aware and sitting with what's happening in my body. Um, so what's surprising is I guess I feel more and more like me as I do this work and more in my heart. And perhaps that makes sense when you look in the deeper mechanisms of it. But I think that what surprises me the most is that, that I still love doing this work even after, decades of learning about it and practicing it in different forms, right? Different forms of counseling. And then, just in my licensed experience too, that, you know, that there's just so much beauty and just growth even for myself in helping others grow. Like so much I learned from people. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely resonates. I
Yeah.
you frame that. Um, okay, so we kind of touched on this question a little
Yeah.
bit back, but are there things you wish people knew or understood about therapy? I mean, we talked a
Hmm.
little bit about expectations, kind of took a little detour
Hmm.
before we get to this question, but are
Yeah.
there things that we haven't kind of already touched upon that you would say is kind of you wish people knew or understood?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think people do come to understand some of these things with the experience of it. Like, so when you're in therapy, you learn about how to do it in a way, like you learn through doing and not just by reading about it or hearing about it. So I don't even know if saying this out loud is going to help people because it's sort of like you can imagine what I mean by this, but until you go through it, you might not know. I think there are two things. I think there are limits to therapy. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that therapy only goes so far in terms of helping people change. If you're coming to see me once a week for 50 minutes, how many minutes are there in a week, right? Like that's a very drop in the bucket kind of experience. And yet, I think therapy works best when not that short-term therapy can't work. I think people are like coming to work on a single issue and they're like, I just want to get over my fear of speaking. And that's it, right? That's a different kind of therapy than the kind of therapy I tend to offer folks. So like when it comes to more deeper work or more relational work or right, like systemic or trauma healing, that kind of thing. Um, I guess I just wish people understood that there is a process that will unfold. And research shows the more you trust the process, the more likely it will work for you. It's really interesting. It's like psychological, right? Like what you believe comes to be. And if you believe it's not going to work, it may not work, right? It might. It's okay to be skeptical also, by the way. But yeah, there's also limits, right? So trusting the process, that is a big piece of it. Like, can you kind of surrender to this is what's happening? And at the same time, understand like there's only so much we can do here, right? Because people sometimes consciously, unconsciously bring a whole lot of expectation in the process. I imagine I'll feel better in like 2 sessions, and then why isn't it working? Right. So I hope people understand that this is not a, at least the type of therapy I do is not necessarily a quick fix. You may feel dramatically different after a session. That may also happen, but know that there's just sort of like a process that's happening. Um, but yeah, there's also limitations. I mean, one of the reasons why I became a coach is because our licenses really do limit us. They're the intention, maybe, we'll give them a lot of benefit of the doubt here, right? Our regulatory boards and things like that, to keep people safe. At least that's what they tell us, right? But things like I have to report if you are a threat to yourself or others, or I have to report if you report harm to, a child or, a vulnerable person. There is a whole lot of gray area that we enter. And the law is like, boom. And then we're in this gray area and we see the complexity of it. And maybe I have feelings about this personally, right? Maybe I don't know that this is the best thing. Or sometimes, like, somebody really does need to intervene to save a life. And we do need to protect someone. But, I think like this idea that, and I'm coming from more of a decolonized way of thinking about therapy, which is that sometimes these things can actually be harmful because we're then part of the system and we are not just representatives, but we're operators within the system that can hurt people, even if the intention um, is good. And so I wish that people knew that, us being these, having these licenses, we might not always agree with the laws, even though we technically have to follow them. And so I'm not saying this necessarily comes up as much with the coaching because we're so focused on, for me and my coaching business, we're focused on like, the business or your relationship with money, or, we're talking about, what's getting in the way of where you want to go, right? Something more active. But just understand that, yeah, there's both a trust in the process that could be useful for you to really utilize it, but also understanding, there's some things that may not really help, or there's a limit to what therapy can actually help you accomplish. And both can be true. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank
Um,
you.
okay, so final question in this little segment.
Mhm.
Is there a tool? I mean, we have tons of tools, you kind of have touched upon it a little bit, but it
Yeah,
depends on, but is there one that you'd like to share maybe with this audience that might be a good,
sure. Yeah, so it's a I guess this tool is something that I've made up, and
okay,
it's
great. Love
a
it.
compilation of a bunch of different approaches, and it's for relationships, right? And so I think this especially comes up with, people you're closest to. It's a useful tool for, if you have a partner or a family member, someone that just activates you and drives you up the wall. Or you tend to have conflict with this person, right? Like conflict is often co-created experience, right? Of one or both people really struggling to get vulnerable, and stay connected to each other. So this tool comes from attachment theory, it comes from some neuroscience, it comes from just maybe some relational wisdom, it comes from what I see works and doesn't work with my time with couples and, and helping folks, and my own personal experience, right? So I like to use the metaphor of when we're staying, and this is not calm, right? When I say the word calm, I don't mean to say like devoid of emotion or dissociated or um, totally chill. I think we can be calm and pissed, right?
Sure. Both those states.
The clinical word is emotionally regulated, right? But I like to use a not so technological of a word because I think when we understand like calm, there's sort of a centeredness, right, to that experience. So maybe centered, staying centered is a better one. So I imagine a boat, right? And when we stay centered or we stay calm enough, and the waters are choppy, so the waters represent emotion, and the boat represents your nervous system, right? Staying in the boat is ideal, right? Because if you go overboard, you're not able to navigate, right? You want to stay in the boat to be able to row the boat, to get out of those choppy waters, to move past it, to get somewhere you want to go. And so, yes, this boat is really, really important, right? Staying in the boat. So, when you're with your partner or your loved one, ideally, you both stay in the boat and then you can row and you can get somewhere. So whether you're disagreeing about a problem or, you just have a decision to make about something and you're having a hard time communicating about it. If one of you goes outside the boat, meaning loses their cool, right? So now they're dysregulated, they are in fight or flight, they're yelling at you, or they're shutting down, or something is going on where their brain is like, uh-oh, and you're no longer able to talk. You can see this happening, right? You can start to recognize, oh, my partner is not centered enough to have this conversation. Or maybe it's yourself. Maybe you notice yourself yelling, or you notice yourself freezing up, or right, like you have kind of a response that's not helping the communication flow and helping the connection maintain. So if one or both of you is outside of the boat, the job is to get back in the boat first before you try to get somewhere. And I think it's a shortcut to a lot. Like this is like the number one thing. Like if I had to give you one piece of advice before you leave here, it's try to stay calm if your partner's upset. And that's why, right? So using this metaphor of staying in the boat as much as possible. We're going to go outside the boat all the time. This is normal. You shouldn't be superhuman. I'm not saying like, no matter what, stay in the boat. We all take our turns, right? But if you notice your partner's outside the boat, you don't rock the boat and then kick them off. Your job is to send them a lifesaver or give them a minute so they can climb back in themselves, right? Steady yourself, right? It's not going to work if both of you are not in the boat. So I try to help. Sometimes I use this metaphor frequently with couples or with individuals and just checking in. Are you centered? Are you calm enough? Can we really, are you able to think and feel at the same time? Then we can go. If we can't do that, we're going to work on just getting back in the boat, right? Because that's our job right now. And so I think this is it's just liberating for people. It's like it's depathologizing, it's normalizing, it gives people like a job to do, some clarity on what's not working and why. It's like you can't go anywhere if you're both not in the boat together. And then you can just on your own too. You can use this by yourself, right? If I'm not in the boat, how can I actually do something, right? Get something done. Yeah.
Great analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. Glad you like it.
Maybe. I like the boat.
Yep. Yep. Good one to use on the regular. Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Natalie. That's kind of the first part of our, section here. It's a little bit more clinical. And so if you're open to it, I want to move into those kind of get to know you on a
Yeah,
little personal level. Great.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's dive in.
Yes.
First question, what is making you happy right now?
Mm, that's a good one. Well, I have to say, admittedly, I'm on a break from clinical work. I'm working on writing a book, and while it's been 2 weeks into my break out of 7, I have yet to write a single word. But I have to say that taking a break right now is helping me. The state of the world and what's happening in our government, the fascist takeover, and all of that is not helping me. But what's helping me is I'm working on finding my center and I'm working on like bringing creative energy right now, which is so important. I think all of us finding our center and our creative energy is a form of resistance. So that's what's making me happy. Yeah.
Okay, what's your favorite app right now?
Favorite app. Um, well, I just joined it. So maybe jury's out for now, but I just joined Blue Sky. Have you heard of it?
Blue Sky?
Yeah, it's like a new social media app
Oh,
and um it's different. It's like you can actually connect with people. It's sort of like Instagram. It has a lot of features of Instagram, almost like, well, you don't really have a feed, but maybe it's more like threads in that you can like post little blurbs and photos and stuff like that. But I'm enjoying getting to know that and like exploring it and figuring it out. Yeah.
okay, beach or mountains?
Beach.
Hands down, I guess you're in Hawaii. So.
Yes, I'm in Hawaii. It's true. I love I love the beach.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, what is one thing that the movies never get right? Could be anything. What do you just notice
Oh,
watching movies? They just don't.
yes. Well, as a couples therapist, I have to say they do not get fighting and repair right. People struggle a lot more than right. And there's something about the cadence. Maybe this is all because of money and, screenwriting and all the things that go on behind the scenes, but they do not get relationships in terms of like conflict, rupture, and repair right at all. Like oftentimes it's way messier. Oftentimes we get really, really stuck and just know that like, yeah, people forgiving each other for without like changed behavior or like genuine repair or right. I don't know if that's healthy, number one. And also number two, it's just like, no, you wouldn't just like go back to normal suddenly after that happened. Like people would show signs of mistrust or people would, like there would be repercussions for certain things that, you're like, really? That was not realistic at all. Yes.
Yep. I, I would agree.
It's a little
Okay,
ridiculous sometimes.
great.
Uh-huh.
Okay, what's the best way to relax?
Mm. Oh my gosh. Well, I can speak for myself because I think this is so personal. Like one person's relaxation might be like absolutely irritating for another, depending on your neurotype and just your nervous system and what you need. But oh, I think like I think being in water for me
Mhm.
is the best way. Like so whether it's like walking along the beach or actively being on the water. Like when I do resourcing for myself, I'm often like floating on the water or I'm with someone or like there's like a raft or like that there's some kind of rocking and the sound, the smell, the feeling, the sensation and or just even being submerged in water. So like taking a bath or being in a pool or being in a body of water for me is like works every time. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, where would be a dream trip location? Where do you kind of want to go that you haven't been?
Well, I live there.
Fair, fair.
Yes, I live in Hawaii. So, yeah. Although I have to say, I really want to go. I feel called to go to Burma specifically. There's a lot of teachings, Theravadan Buddhist teachings that I have received in my life that come from that place in the world. And I just feel really connected to, um, maybe just the people and the land and just wanting to visit that place where a lot was born out of that place in the world. So a lot of good energy and yeah, just sort of a spiritual connection. there. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Definitely has not come up from anybody else. So
Yeah.
that's great. Um,
Yeah.
okay, what advice would you give to your younger self? If you could kind of like go back in time, what advice
Mm.
would you like to give to your younger self?
Mhm. I don't know if most women say this, but I would want my younger self to know that her intuition is extremely powerful and that there always has been, and I know this to be true, like I feel quite emotional about this, but there always has been a deeper inner knowing that has often been covered up by a lot of external, maybe like intense experiences, hurtful experiences, and social norms and expectations, but that there's a part of me, a part of her that always has known things about her inner world and herself that no one else can tell her. And to trust those feelings of, something is off here, or, um, you know, that there's just like things that only you can feel in your own body that you can know are true about what's happening around you or what's happening or what you need, right? And who you are. Um, and so again, maybe a lot of women, I think a lot of us women are trained out of maybe men too, genders, all genders, maybe all of us to a degree, but I think women are really taught, very specifically as like having a more of a femme gender. I feel like I've been trained out of believing myself. And yeah, that's what I hope. I wish there were certain things that I knew that in retrospect I rediscovered, if you will, in different relationships or just different situations that were not safe or just situations that were not a fit and relationships that were not a fit. It's not even about danger, it's just about what I needed or who I am, who I was at the time. So that's what I wish. I wish, things might have gone quite a lot differently had I trusted myself more.
Beautiful
Mhm.
answer.
Mm.
Um, okay, a little bit lighter of a question.
Yeah. Do it.
Out of the four seasons, which one's the best?
Summer.
Summer.
I was born in July. I'm a Leo and I live for that.
Fair. Fair enough.
Yes. Yes. My
Fits
fave.
Myrtle Beach and,
If
water
it, if
as
it,
well.
yes.
For sure.
Hmm.
Okay. What would be the worst super power to have? If you were a superhero, what would be the worst power to have?
Mm. Well, maybe this is inspired by like I was watching House MD, one of those old school.
So,
And it was this like, or maybe it wasn't even that. It was one of those medical shows. I'm watching like a few of them right now, and it's a little confusing. But um, the power to not feel anything,
mm,
like pain or sensation,
like you put your foot
right?
on a hot stove and you don't know that it's
Yeah, I think that would be pretty debilitating. I know there are people out there who have that experience, which, right? But I'm even just thinking about our and maybe I'm thinking actually emotionally, not just physical pain, right? But the power to like not feel anything. Like I think there are people who have figured out how to dissociate so much from their feelings that it's such a therapist answer, isn't it? But like that just feels like a whole like you miss the meaning, you miss the experience, you miss the lessons, you miss the connection, like I think some of us, in a moment of desperation or feeling, I don't know what to do with this feeling or it's overwhelming. It's like I don't want to feel anything, but um yeah, that superpower seems
fair.
rough to me. Like, no, thank you.
Yeah. I think almost any
Yeah.
superpower could go bad. So, have you ever watched
Right.
The Boys? I brought this up with other people.
No.
it's very gory and stuff, like especially as a season
Oh,
one, but
okay. Yeah.
it's about like people among us having superpowers, and you see
Right.
how they go wrong all the time.
You can misuse them.
Yes, people misuse them or
Mm.
accidentally, like there's this one guy who like he runs really fast, but he like ran through somebody because he
Mm.
didn't realize he was like running through like just gross,
Oh,
like
wow.
anything,
Yeah,
like,
no thanks.
but like there's things in my way and then I
Yeah.
through or, I don't know, whatever.
Mhm.
Anyways, that's part of the reason I came up with that question.
Yeah.
Like,
Wow.
that's
Yeah. The
anything.
worst thing you could think of, right?
Totally.
Oh.
Uh, okay, so next question. What is an animal that you feel kind of connected to on a kind of deeper level?
Mm. Um, well, I feel connected to quite a few actually. A grizzly bear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Any
Um,
reason grizzly bear?
I think they're incredible.
Yeah,
I
they're
think they're
majestic.
so resilient. I think, and specifically grizzlies, like I spent a summer up in Alaska, like very, very wild, rural Alaska when I was a kid, and it changed my life. Like it changed my just my perception of the world and my connection to nature and animals. And I remember because we lived so far out, it's like a few hours north of Anchorage is where we were staying in like the middle of nowhere, little tiny town with like 20 people, for a whole summer. And it was incredible. It was my favorite summer of my whole childhood. But I remember we had to learn these ways, like you had this little phrase if you ran into a moose or a bear or right, like these just different animals that might be dangerous, right? You have to different strategies to
Uh-huh.
kind of make sure that you keep yourself safe around them. Um, but yeah, I just remember like you don't want to climb a tree if a bear is after you, right? Like that's the last thing you want
They're
to do
way
because
faster.
they're way fast climbing trees. They're incredible. Um, but I remember feeling both kind of like this awe and terror about like, because I encountered some bears and I mean, you just make a little noise and usually that's fine. Like I actually didn't feel threatened, but I just remember like the fear was instilled in me by grown-ups and I was like 7. So I was like, oh my gosh, what's a bear? But like I just remember feeling so in awe because I just think they're beautiful and they're so resilient and their size is just very powerful and being able to go hibernate for like months is just so resilient, right? And then they get to eat like fish and berries and those are like my favorite things. A whole lot of salmon berries, like that's like amazing. And I just love, and their little cubs are so cute. And I just think, just even that archetype of like mama bear is just so powerful. Like there's something about, um, yeah, I just feel a lot of connection to that grizzly mama bear energy. Um, yeah, super powerful.
Are you familiar with that show Homestead Rescue?
No,
So my husband and I are kind of obsessed with it right now. We've watched
yeah.
many seasons, but it's this family, the Rainies, and they're up in north of Anchorage in Alaska, but they go
Mhm.
to like all different homesteads all over the states. Some are in Alaska,
Wow.
and they try to
Yeah.
help people with like, food, water, but there's always this like protecting from resources, and they've done a number in
Mm,
Australia, and it is like, yeah, you got bears, you got, like
right.
how are we going to protect?
Yeah.
This animal that's just trying to do what it's trying to do, right? And like,
Yeah. They're just your neighbor. I mean, you moved into their neighborhood, right? Like,
exactly.
gotta be respectful.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I'll check it out.
Yeah. We enjoy
Yeah.
it.
Fun.
Um, okay, so final question. When you
Mm,
look back at your life, what do you hope you'll be able to say?
mm, it's super deep. That I loved well. Not that I was loved, but that I learned how to love people well. Yeah. Mm, yeah.
Well, thank you, Natalie. You are
Mm.
officially seen.
Thank
appreciate you
you.
taking the time to
Thank you.
chat with me. And for anybody watching, I will put Natalie's information in the kind of comments below or whatever, so you can reach out if you'd like to connect with her more.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thanks again, Natalie. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you so much, Kealy. This was fun. I really
me.
appreciate you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.